Hello, Browns fans. Welcome to the first and 1085. I am your host, Anthony Joki. As always, I got my co-host, Jack McCurry, with me. Tonight, we are going to discuss the NFL release or schedule today, which means the Browns do have a nice little schedule here for the 2020 season. So what we're gonna do is kind of look at each week and see how the matchups stack up. And we have a couple other topics we want to discuss here, but first, Jack, how you doing, man? It's been a couple of weeks since we talked.
Oh, doing well, man. It's business as usual, going out and, being essential, quote unquote. Just hanging in there, man. How you been doing?
Yeah, I kind of still stuck at home, but, I have another 3-4 weeks off from work before I probably go back, but we'll reevaluate that as we get closer. I'm not sure if I'm going to take more time off or if we're going to get back to work. We'll see. So we'll see how things turn out here. They seem to be getting a little bit better with things starting to open up and whatnot, but time will tell in 2 or 3 weeks or so when it's time for me to go back. We wanted to get in here and obviously talk to new schedule. And then, like I said earlier, there's a couple other things we want to talk about. But the Cleveland Browns will open the 2020 NFL season on the road and play the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Browns did beat the Ravens last year in Baltimore. I want to say it was 40-25 in week 4, I believe it was. And they kind of ran the ball all over Baltimore, and then after that, the Ravens went on a nice run that propelled them all the way into the playoffs. But Jack, having Baltimore on the road week 1, what are your initial thoughts?
I mean, Tom Withers of the Associated Press had hinted like an hour or so before the schedule dropped that it was going to be a tough one, and everybody immediately thought it was going to be Baltimore. I mean, we knew who the Browns were going to be playing this year. We just didn't know when they were going to be. And, I mean, you can argue all you want, but I would say Baltimore is the toughest team we're going to play during the 2020 season. They were a dominant team last year. They loaded back up on the defensive side of the ball. And they have Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP. They've added weapons on the offensive side. It's going to be a tough matchup, especially for a new coaching staff, new players like Jedrick Wills. I mean, gets the big test going up against a stout Baltimore Ravens defensive line. And you don't know when they're going to be able to get on the field and start getting acclimated with each other with a new offensive scheme, new players, all that. So big first test. But the last time the Browns and the Ravens met up in the season opener, which was 2004, the Browns won. That was also the last time they won a season opener. So hopefully luck will be on our side and we finally win the opener.
Yeah, Browns actually have a decent chance at winning the home opener this year because 4 days later, they play host to the number 1 overall pick, Joe Burrow, and the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday Night Football. And that's going to be a spectacular matchup, I believe. And, we might actually get out of there with it being a home opener win for once as well. Week 3, they have another tough test on the defensive side. They have Chase Young and the Washington Redskins at home at 1 o'clock. Week 4, they travel to Dallas. I know this has been a very key matchup that everybody's been hoping for. I know a lot of people wanted it to be on Thanksgiving. That is not the case, but we do have Dallas week 4.
Yeah, I mean, the team that is known as America's team is facing the team that people have dubbed the world's team. So this is going to be a game that could be the game of the week. Even though it's a 1 o'clock game, you could see a scenario potentially maybe Troy Aikman and Joe Buck call this game on Fox, even though it's a 1 o'clock game. They usually do the 4:30 game. That's usually America's game of the week. But because the Browns have a big fan base, Dallas, we all know, has a big fan base, this could be a prime time game, even though it's a 1 o'clock game. But you get Dak, Amari, and Zeke versus Baker, Chubb, and Odell. And I mean, you don't get much better than that when you're talking about matchups when it comes to the NFL.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun one, and there's so much star power on both teams, and that game being in Dallas, It's going to be a tough one. They have a lot of offensive weapons to worry about. They're decent on the defensive side of football as well. So they do have a new head coach in Mike McCarthy, who many thought the Browns might go after. But, it's certainly going to be another interesting wrinkle into the matchup against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 4. Week 5, they play host to the Indianapolis Colts at 4:25 at home. That's the second of 3 primetime games that we get. And, Jack, that Colts game is going to be interesting because they kind of revamped everything this offseason, and that's certainly a team that I think is certainly one to watch out for with all the different talent that they have on offense, on defense, and that's going to be a very intriguing matchup in Week 5.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Colts are kind of a team that's on the same trajectory as the Browns. They've sped it up just a little bit more with the signing of Phillip Rivers. Then you go into the draft and you already had T.Y. Hilton, you had Marlon Mack, you had a Jonathan Taylor and a Michael Pittman to that offense. They have a talented defense. This is going to be one of those pivotal matchups that could make or break the Browns season and also make or break the Colts season. There are 2 teams going to be vying potentially for that 6th or 7th spot in the AFC playoff picture. So going to be a great matchup. Another, like you said, it's another primetime game. Could be, Jim Nantz and Tony Romo calling this game. So, I've seen a lot of people complaining that the lack of primetime games doesn't mean the Browns aren't playing in big games. The fact that 12 out of the 16 games are at 1 o'clock, you look at the schedule, there's big games all across this schedule, and the Colts one is no different.
And then Week 6, we travel to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers at 1 o'clock, and obviously this will be the first time we played them since this will be the second time we played them since the Myles Garrett incident. And, traveling to Pittsburgh is going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, those Browns-Steelers games are always intense, but I think with both games against Pittsburgh at 1 o'clock this year, I think that the NFL didn't want another one of those matchups in prime time.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, but like I said, this game will be watched, the second time when they went back to Pittsburgh after the Myles Garrett incident, it was a nationally broadcasted game. And I think the attention was on everybody. The attention was on the Browns, how they were going to respond to Pittsburgh. How was Pittsburgh going to respond to Cleveland? But nothing really happened. This is one of the big rivalries in the history of the league. This is also the first time Ben Roethlisberger will be playing the Browns since his shoulder surgery. So it's going to be interesting to see how he plays coming back off the injury. So it's always an exciting matchup. And the Browns haven't won in Pittsburgh in a long time. So hopefully they can break the snide this year.
In Week 7, the Browns travel to Cincinnati to play the Bengals. Week 8. They are home to the Las Vegas Raiders, which is still weird. Week 9 is when they have their bye week, so right in the middle of the season. And I also want to point out that weeks 1 through 8 is 4 home games, 4 away games, then the bye week, and then after the bye week, 4 home games, 4 away games. And part of me wonders if that's intentional or not. Week 10, they play host to the Houston Texans on Fox. So they'll have 2 weeks to get ready for Houston. They turn around and play host also to the Philadelphia Eagles, so they have 3 home games in a row with the bye week in there. They play at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, and then all those games I just mentioned are at 1 o'clock. Then, Jack, we get Monday Night Football, week 14, home against the Baltimore Ravens. Then to close it out, we go at New York for both the Giants and the Jets in weeks 15 and 16. They play host to the Steelers in week 17. But when you look at that second half of that schedule, do you think it's pretty favorable having, Las Vegas, bye week, Houston, Philly, Jacksonville, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good stretch. It's going to be a tough stretch. I mean, you look, Houston's a playoff team, Philly's a playoff team, Tennessee, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh. it's no cupcake schedule the second half of the year. Like, and if the Browns are going to want to prove everybody that they belong, that the talent is worth all the hype, like, this is the time to do it. I mean, and you can't sleep on teams like Jacksonville, the Giants, and the Jets, even though, the Browns might be superior to them in talent. Like, talent isn't everything. And that was made clear last year. And, even recent comments by players on the roster saying the talent wasn't everything. They got to work hard for this. The coaches have to make these guys prepared week in and week out, no matter what. But I think, the Browns can stack up against all these teams. The one thing I'm going to be watching is those week 15 and 16 matchups. Odell Beckham returning to New York. We've seen what he did last year against the Jets on Monday night. Obviously, this is going to be his first crack at the Giants since they traded him. So I would expect Beckham to put on a show, and hopefully the Browns are still in the thick of it, because it would make those games even more meaningful.
And it's to be determined when that Jets game is going to be. It's either going to be on Saturday and Sunday. My guess is it's got a good chance of being one of those Saturday night primetime games at 4 o'clock, or maybe even 7 o'clock on the Saturday slate that they do later on in the season. So I'm really interested to see how that shakes out. Jack, I guess this whole thing with the schedule is very interesting, because I would say it's very tentative right now with everything that's going on in the world. I know that we're all excited with the fact that they released a schedule for the season, but plans can change. And if this pandemic is still happening, if this thing doesn't cool down, if we get a second wave of this schedule, certainly could go out the window. And I think it's very interesting that, they had a lot of the division games early and then in the last few weeks of the season. So I wonder if that was purposely intentional to kind of have the meat or the middle of the schedule have games that are out of the division and maybe out of conference, versus having those divisional games early on and late as well, just in case maybe something happens and they have to condense the schedule down a little bit.
Or
move it back.
Right. They said Troy Vincent, who works for the NFL, said this is the schedule and there's no alternative schedule. Now, I'm sure, they do have contingency plans in place, because we really don't know what's going to happen at this point. I know, there's been reports that they're going to start opening facilities and stuff in the coming weeks, as long as they're approved by the state. I know, like in Ohio, for instance, the Cavs facility opens on Friday. So, but I don't know what they're going to do for the NFL. But I would imagine there's contingencies in place. I do like the way they structured the schedule, like you said, having some divisional games early as well as late in the year. They kind of seem to even everything out, like you said, with the 4 home games, 4 away games in both the first and the second half. So I do think they're going to be flexible. I'm sure there's contingency plans. We've heard rumored ones. So it's all going to be interesting to see how this shakes out, if we get the season started on time, and what'll happen once, they get back into business, because, right now everything's virtual. Like, there's no on-field workouts. I'm sure these guys can work out at home if they have the proper equipment. The coaches, I'm sure, are giving them, what they need to do. But until we get like an official word, like, yeah, training camp's going to start on time, like, we're sitting here talking about the schedule, but everything's tentative at this point.
Yeah, I believe they're supposed to have the virtual rookie minicamp this weekend, and that's something
that's
else
right.
that we'll discuss, early on next week. But they're supposed to have that, and like I said, everything's all tentative right now. We'll see how, we'll see if there's fans in the stands for these games. I would imagine it would be hard to have a season without fans in the stands, but that's certainly something that's still yet to be determined. I would tend to guess. So
I don't expect fans to be in the stands, honestly.
Yeah, I would put it at like 75-25 of no fans. So And if a player on a team gets this virus, does the whole team have to sit out, and is that going to pause the season? There's still a lot of things that have to be determined with what's going to happen for this NFL schedule and slate of games in 2020. Well, that's all we wanted to discuss for this episode. We want to kind of get in here, talk about the schedule a little bit, and get out. You can always follow Jack on Twitter at Jack McCurry08. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at The Dogland. With all that, I'm going to get on out of here. Most importantly, go Browns.